Hi, my name's Ishmael Naylor and today we're going to be talking about lease option agreements. What is a lease option agreement? Where can you find them? What type of people will do them? And how you execute them to make sure they work correctly. So, first off, what is a lease option agreement? Well, it's where you rent a property on a management agreement or lease a property for a period of time. So you pay a landlord or homeowner a fixed rent, which you so-called guarantee the rent for a fixed period. So most people do lease options for 3 or 5 years. So you'll rent the property with an option to buy the property at the end of the 3 or 5 year period. So you might rent a property at £500 per calendar month for 5 years, and that property might today be valued at £100,000. So you'll say, I'll buy that property at 100, 110,000, whatever you agree, in 5 years' time, in the hope that in 5 years' time the property is worth more than the 100 or 110 that you've agreed, and the property is worth, say, 150, and then you're purchasing the property at that 5 year mark at a big discount on the market value. So it's like a rent to buy, but it's structured completely different. Now, is a lease option agreement legal? Yes, it is. A lease option agreement is legal because you can rent a property of someone and buy it in the future. Now, the reason you would do this in business terms is you would rent a property at a discounted rate or at a rate for single let, and you would rent it out at a higher rate on the open market, or you would turn it into something like a HMO, House of Multiple Occupants, or a multi-let, which you can find out more about in my other video. And when you rent it out like this, you could also do it as a serviced accommodation. And when you rent it out on a short term or a other way than a standard family single let, then you would be increasing the rents per calendar month, and you'd be taking a difference between the rent you pay and the rent that you're making. So you might get a property on a rent-to-rent scheme effectively, and then you are making the profit between the rent you pay at 500, say, and if you rent it out as a HMO with 4 rooms at £400 a month, you're making 1,600. Now if you're renting at 500, you're making 1,600, then you've got £1,100 gross profit. Then obviously, as it's a multi-let, you're going to be paying council tax, you're going to be paying bills, maintenance of the building, and various other things that you might incur, and running costs of your business, management fee if you're not going to manage it yourself, and that will come out of that £1,100 and bring your profit margin down. Now, generally you would work this as same as you would work a rent-to-rent on your profit margins. You would want about £500 per calendar month as a sort of minimum, but you can go down to £200 per calendar month as a minimum profit, because you're looking at this as a long-term investment, so you're looking at it on the option to buy at the end, and that is where you're going to make most of your profit, but you do want to make a small profit along the way. Are these legal? Yes, because you work to them like a rent-to-rent scheme. The rent-to-rent scheme, you're renting it on a management contract and you're letting it out as an agent and not as someone who was planning to live there on an AST, a short-hold tenancy agreement, but you're renting out on a management contract, or possibly even on a lease, which is you're effectively paying for the property to live in it and lease the property, as some flats are a leasehold property. Slightly different structure, because then you pay up front and you pay for the 5 years. You could do that with this as well. You could pay up front and pay for a fixed 5-year lease, and you could pay a lump sum and you wouldn't have a monthly rent. It all depends on whether you want cash flow or whether they want a lump sum, or how exactly you want to structure the deal. That's between you and the person you're renting a property off or doing a lease option agreement with. Where do you find people who want to do a lease option agreement? So, generally it's distressed sellers. Now, I don't like to only use these. A lot of trainers look at finding people who are vulnerable and getting them to sign a contract which isn't beneficial for them. Some trainers do it so it's beneficial for them as well, and other trainers don't do lease option agreements as a rent-to-rent on a long-term scheme. So it all depends on your structure, what you're trying to achieve from a lease option agreement, to where you're going to find them. You can find them, like everything else, through agents, on Rightmove, Zoopla. You might find them on Gumtree, you might find them on other places like Open Rent or Spare Rooms. Anywhere where you can find properties, there is a potential to find a lease option agreement. Generally, the people who will do a lease option agreement are people who cannot sell or in negative equity. Now, if they cannot sell, their properties will be on the market for a very long time. If they're trying to sell the property at above market value, you'll also find that they would have probably been on the market quite a long time, or they're asking, say, 120,000, whereas all the other similar properties in the area are only worth or selling for 100,000. So you know that they're in negative equity because they are not bringing the price down to the fair market value of the property. So these are the people that you would be targeting to try and help them out by saying, okay, you need to sell at 120, I'll pay your mortgage, I'll give you a small percentage profit in the meantime, and I'll give you that 120,000, but I will give you that £120,000 in 5 years' time, and hopefully in 5 years' time the market will have recovered. In the meantime, you can move on and do whatever else you were trying to do, but obviously you don't get the lump sum from the property. But generally, they have no equity in the property, that's why they're trying to sell at the 120 when everything else is worth 100, because if everything else was worth 120, then they would have sold, and if they could sell at 100, then they probably would have dropped their price. But the fact that they're trying to sell it above market value suggests that they need the money for one reason or other. They might have credit card debts on top of their mortgage, they might have got 120% mortgage. Back in 2008, 2007 they were doing them, where you could get a property on 100% mortgage and you could borrow an extra 20%, so you could do refurbishment to the property. A lot of people using that 20% to go on holiday. So they weren't increasing the value of the property, and property prices crashed afterwards and they haven't fully recovered. So this meant that they can't sell at the price they're trying to sell at. So how do you make sure that a lease option agreement works for your benefit and for theirs, and there's no catches? Simple, use a solicitor. Make sure whatever you do, you use legally binding contracts and you go to a solicitor who knows about lease option agreements. The lease option agreement is generally a commercial solicitor if you can't find a normal solicitor that does it, but they need to know about doing lease option agreements. It's quite a standard, straightforward thing, but it's effectively 3 contracts, not 1, not 2, but 3 contracts. You have a management agreement or a lease agreement, which is you looking after the property and managing the tenants that go in the property. You have, quite often, a power of attorney agreement, which allows you to do things to the property, various possibly structural changes, or just if you're going to convert the property into like a HMO, you'll need fire doors and you need to get planning permission, and giving you that power of attorney contract over that property will mean that you won't have to get them involved every time you try and apply to the planning office. And then you will also need a option agreement, which is a separate contract which you sign, which gives you the power to purchase the property within or at a fixed date. Now, I would suggest you always try and purchase property within the time frame, and so that you are benefiting the person you're getting the property off. I would also put a clause in there saying that you give them 1 year's notice prior to the end of the contract, saying that in that 1 year time I either intend or do not intend to buy, and you could say I would like to extend the contract. So this means that they have 12 months to put it back on the market to try and sell. Hopefully you won't just leave them hanging and leave the property with them, and you will continue the contract until it does eventually pick up and you can get them out of the situation which you found them in. Because if you leave them because the price hasn't picked up, then they're still in the same situation. They cannot sell the property at the price they were trying to, because the market hasn't picked up to a price you want to pay for it, which is generally around the price they were trying to originally. So hopefully at this point you would speak to them and say, look, at the current market situations and my prediction for the next 12 months, I cannot really buy the property at the agreed price that we said. However, I would like to extend the period of our agreement so that we can continue this so-called business relationship, I would call it, and we can extend this for a couple more years, and hopefully at that time it will have picked up enough for me to take the property as we originally agreed. I think this is probably the best way of dealing with it, and morally the best way, as well as best for them, and possibly it's okay for you if not the best for you, because if the property's been working for such a long time, then why would it not continue to work as in rental income? So you can take it on there and continue your rental agreements with them. What are the pros and cons of a lease option? Well, the pro is you agree to a price now and you can pay for it in 5 years' time, or whatever time period you agree to pay for it. In the meantime, you're making a rental income with very little input of money. You need to obviously do legal fees and a £1 contractual agreement. You may or may not need to put any money into the property, and you may or may not need to pay the vendor or the property owner a sum to start the agreement. Sometimes if the property needs work, you'll get a rental reduction for a month or two, or you might get no rent for the first month or two, and you'll pay for the work. And obviously because you've added value to the property, they are more likely to give you that discount for the first couple of months, and therefore you don't have a big lump sum you expel. Now you do need to pay a £1 option agreement. That's a con, but it's not very big. Obviously you've got the legal fees, that's a con, but it's not very big. Now if you're looking at the income from it, potentially you're controlling a property without a big investment. So there aren't really many cons. The biggest problem with lease option agreements is finding the people who will do them. And the second biggest mistake people make is not using solicitors, or the correct solicitors. You need to have a solicitor and they need to have a solicitor. The contracts need to be checked over and made sure everything is understood. If they do not have a solicitor, they can say that you took advantage of them, and when you try and exercise the option agreement, you will not be allowed to exercise the option agreement, and you will not be able to buy that property at the price you were planning to, and they'll end up having the property back, and you would have only gained the rental income in the meantime. If you like this video, please smash the like button, subscribe to my channel, click the bell notification icon to make sure you get notified of the next video on Tuesday.